This is a starting piece for my contribution to the archives here. First of all, the meeting of the Boehmers. We have to go back to 1950. I had just been out of the Army after World War II in 1946 and had gone to Willamette University and graduated there with a BA in theater and speech and English, and was working at the radio station KOCO in Salem, a real throbbing little hometown station that did everything from drama to sports to news to covering live fires and so forth. I was also working for a little extra money with J. Gordon Thornton was his name. He was from Virginia. He'd been with Decca Records way back in the beginning of Decca and had worked in many places in Europe and in the United States, and was a bit of a drifter, but he had a little public relations company in Salem, and he was interested in me and a couple of the people I worked with were kind of proteges of his. Anyway, J. Gordon Thornton, who was always trying to get me into things, he said he had an extra role in the possible speaking part in Quo Vadis being filmed in Rome, but fortunately, or unfortunately, I stopped just short of flying to Rome on that one. But when he said he was a personal friend of Angus Boehmer in Ashland, and that he knew all about the festival, it was really great and much better than people thought, and that he thought my great acting talents, I had been in summer stock in New England, and I had acted in high school and at Willamette and directed and designed, and I had my own radio theater and at KOCO. I wrote for it, starred in it, and directed and produced it, so I was thinking I was pretty hot stuff, I suppose. Anyway, Jay thought that I would be a biggie in Ashland, and he insisted that I go down there with him and meet the Angus Boehmer. He thought we would hit it off great, and I would be in the company in 1950, and the career would be launched. Well, I drove down, and boy, in those days that was an arduous drive, I'll tell you, on old 99. And it was in the spring, and it was weather was rainy and foggy up on the peaks, and it took about 8.5 hours to drive it then. And we got to Ashland, and we were staying actually at the what is now called the Mark Antony Hotel. And Jay claimed that we had a dinner date with the Boehmers, and the next evening, which was somewhere in the middle of the week, at their home up on the hill above the Southern Oregon College, or SOC, as I'll probably call it, after this, campus, and where Mr. Boehmer was a professor there, as well as being the center and the director and the producer and the be-all for the festival, which was summers only then. Well, Jay got a bottle of Beefeater's gin and a dozen red roses, and that was going to be our little gift for the dinner we were invited to. And I was very reluctant, to tell you the truth. I was rather shy about the whole thing. I didn't know whether Angus Boehmer gave a tiddly-do, whether I lived or died or even wanted to meet me. But Jay assured me, boy, we're great personal friends with the Boehmers, and they're expecting us, and we're going to go out there, and you're going to meet them, and that's that. So we went and knocked on, it was the back door, which we always used at their house up on Madrone. Everybody did, for years after. We still went in and out that kitchen door instead of the front door, because the kitchen door was on the driveway. We knocked on the door, and I could see and hear through the door window there was something going on in there. It sounded like guests to me. And the door was opened, and it was Gertrude Boehmer. And he asked for Angus, and Angus came to the door. And Jay said, well, here we are. Well, to do the ellipsis thing and cut ahead, Angus L. Boehmer never heard of J. Gordon Thornton in his life before. Had never met him, never seen him. He certainly had never heard of me before. Not only that, but Angus and Gertrude were entertaining friends. Their names are lost in my history. I don't know who they were, but it was two couples were there for dinner. And here we were with a grinning J. Gordon Thornton, a big fat J. Gordon Thornton, and his bow tie, and his little bottle of gin, and a dozen red roses, and we're in. And I am embarrassed to death. I found out immediately that we were not expected, we were not known, we were intruding. But in the graciousness of the Boehmers, they pretended that all was well. And they invited us to stay, and in the course of that crazy, awkward evening, I became a lifelong friend of Angus and Gertrude Bulmer. And a rather elaborately long-told story, but I feel that many of us, many that have figured in the history of the Oregon Shakespearean Festival, as we called it then, have had odd chance encounters which brought us here. And some of us never left, and no matter whether we were here every company season after that or not, and this is 1992, and obviously I haven't been with them solidly since and that's that. But it all began with a brash PR man dragging a kid in his 20s who thought he would be a great actor down to meet the producing director on the pretext of a dinner invitation which didn't exist. We crashed a party, and I've been in it ever since. Anyway, Angus and I got along very well, and so with Gertrude, but particularly with Angus, I found myself talking to him, and I should say he was interviewing me. He was that kind of a man. Right away, he wanted to know all about me and what I thought was important and what I was pay my own way and be here, but then, like everybody else, take my chances on casting. So I went back to Salem, and I finished up the rest of the spring at the radio station. And, well, I had to get work in order to stay in the company. In those days, they did 4 plays. The slogan, which I believe we originated that summer, but I can't prove that. Stay 4 days and see 4 plays, because it was in repertory. And in 1950, see if I can get this straight without looking it up, they were going to do Comedy of Errors, As You Like It, Antony and Cleopatra, and Henry IV, Part 1. And I had to get some work, so through one of the kids that worked at a sawmill called the Sunshine Lumber Company out in the sticks between Ashland and, well, it was out toward California somewhere on that road that ends up being Dead Indian Road. I got a job on the green chain out there. I hadn't worked physically for quite some time, and I'd already been out of the limelight, and I lasted for about half the summer until I wrecked my back. But I had enough money for those first weeks so that at least I was stabilized. I was working in the day at the sawmill and then rehearsing at night. The way it was set up then was having to be there in the daytime. That was my setup, so that's the way it began. Well, jumping ahead a bit in chronology, what happened with the hurt back out there trying to handle wet 2x4s on a double chain alone in the hot sun. As soon as I was disabled, they just stood me aside and fired me. They didn't even pay me my check that day. They kept me waiting until the end of the day without working before I could get paid off, and I went back to town thinking, well, that's that. Well, I had been cast, and I was playing anything of any great importance. I really was not key. I could have been replaced in the snap of the finger. But Angus and Gertrude wouldn't let me go. And Gertrude and Angus decided that why didn't I stay up at their place? They had a garage. They would put a bed in it as an extra room. I could do a little yard work or help around the house, and that would pay for my room and board up there, and I could stay and finish the summer. Typical of the kind of things that the Bulmers did, typical of their kindness and their foresight. Angus made me feel that I was needed, and that's how that part came about, and the fact that I had the delightful experience of living the rest of that summer on the hill on Madrone in that wonderful house with Angus and Gertrude. Angus was directing As You Like It. Dick Graham was directing The Comedy of Errors. Alan Fletcher was directing One Henry IV, and Jim Sandow was directing Antony and Cleopatra. Well, in the initial casting, Angus put me in as the First Lord, the one who has "Sweep on, you fat and greasy citizens" line, and a couple of other little bits. I think I'd played Sir Oliver Martexters, and Jim Sandow, who became a very close friend instantly, and we had simpatico, and I don't know why, but I'm glad we did. He gave me the nice little role of the General Scaurus in Antony and Cleopatra, so I was cast in an interesting way. It wasn't the kind of casting you'd expect coming from your big career elsewhere. But I might throw in here that at that point in time, and I don't use that phrase, wipe that out. I never say at that point in time. Reminds me, I also played the leads and might even been the key director, or in my case, I played the leads in Salem and had in college and had played in summer stock, and I had my own radio theater. And so I was expecting, maybe I ought to be Anthony, you know. I didn't make it. I was just way out of my depth with the core of the company, many of whom had been there before and were known. And I was fortunate to get the casting I did, but naturally I was disappointed and thrown askew, as all people are when they don't get what they want in the theater. But Addis Lane, who was a friend of mine from high school and college days in Salem, a fellow Salemite, and I, she came down the same year and as an actress, and she did very well. She was cast as Rosalind in As You Like It, and Addis cheered me up and kept me going, unfortunately, and we remained friends forever, too. And I didn't even think of quitting until the problem with the job came up, and I afforded to keep myself, because I also had to take care of my mother back in Salem, and I had expenses there while I was gone. So anyway, I got small casting, but interesting, and Angus and Gertrude saved my ass by letting me stay with them, and the season did go on. But to get back to that auditioning thing, people just read whatever they wanted to through all 4 plays. I don't remember any set scenes being done by anybody, but maybe I'm just forgetting that. I remember only that we read and read and read and read for 2 or 3 days, I think it was, and went through all 4 plays all the way through and repeating some key scenes with key people. And then we just dropped out, and all the directors went up to Angus and Gertrude's wonderful house on the hill, and where I was living, but I was not invited to the casting session. I had to stay away from that, but I heard them buzzing, and I know they were there most of the night. And then the casting was posted, and we began rehearsals immediately. As I said, 2 in the afternoon, 2 in the evening, and a lot of people were in all 4. It was true repertory. We had to rehearse fast. The directors knew exactly what they wanted. They discussed everything with Angus during the winter. There was no fooling around or experimentation. We went right for the blocking. Lines had to be learned very, very quickly. It was a very professional thing. It no longer seemed like an old shed sitting at the bottom of a hill inside a wall in Ashland. It seemed like a theater run by professionals and casting professionals and getting ready for a season that was to be dealt with as a high-quality event. It's amazing what was here in 1950, and I know what was there preceded me from 1935 that I unfortunately didn't see any of. Was remarkable for this time and place, and it's something I don't think has ever been repeated anywhere in the world, and probably never will again. There's something about that summer, though, that I wanted to get into these archival pages and tapes and whatnot. It's about a girl, and she was young enough, I guess. Well, we would call her anybody a girl in those days if we liked a young woman, but I guess now it's an insulting term. We had a young actress named Pat Norman, or Patricia Norman, Norman, and she was black. In those days, it was a year to remember for those of us who were very personally involved. Well, I think we'll just refer to it as black now, because that is the current way of saying it when I'm recording this in 1992 anyway. She was a fine young woman, an actress and a dancer and a singer, and I'm not sure how Angus happened to recruit her or get her here, how that came about. I've been trying to find that out, but Gertrude doesn't remember. In fact, Gertrude doesn't even remember Pat Norman at this moment. I'll see if I can find something more on that and put it into the record. But meantime, special arrangements had to be made to have her in the company. And we're talking about Ashland, Oregon in 1950. And even though since 1926 some of these discriminatory practices had been ruled against, the framework of 1926 to 1952, Ashland hadn't come to the party yet. And blacks were really not allowed to stay overnight in Ashland up until the 1950s. They had that sundown law, I believe the bigots referred to it. So special arrangements had to be made to get Pat here, and it was set up that she would stay at SOC, Southern Oregon College, now Southern Oregon State College, stay in a campus dorm. She wouldn't be allowed to stay anywhere else, and no one would rent a room to her because she was black. She couldn't stay overnight, not in Ashland. But that was only the beginning. She had to be escorted, and she needed bodyguards, and we did this on our own in the company, myself and a couple of other guys in the company, I'll have to look their names up. They've slipped my mind right now. Formed a bodyguard for her. We walked her to and from the dorm. We sheltered her against the town's people who times on the street, and we had to fight our way out of these situations. There wasn't any help forthcoming. I told Angus about it because at that time I was living at the Bomers, but Angus did not get excited about the problem because Angus had tunnel vision regarding this festival. Nothing could be allowed to interfere with its success, and he was absolutely right in that attitude. He knew if he took this thing up as a racial cause, even though he thought it was outrageous what was happening, he knew it would only darken the festival's position in the town even further and make the existence, the future of the festival itself in hazard. So nothing was done. We protected Pat all summer long in various ways, and we became good friends. And within our own closed society, the theater company, she had a good time. She played the courtesan in Comedy of Errors. She was brilliant and beautiful on stage. I don't know what happened to her after those years were over, but it's a summer that it remains in my memory indelibly. That bigotry did not die fast, soon, or easily, even here in Oregon. Said all those negative things about now and then, let me please make this very clear. Then, as now, there has been a fine core of fine people in the Rogue Valley, Ashland, Medford, and all the surrounding villages that have been very much supportive of this festival, very humanitarian, very arts-oriented, very decent, grand people. If there hadn't been those people in the old days, and certainly nowadays, the festival would never have survived the way it has and grown to what it is. But it's very important, I think, to remember, at least in these archives, that it has been a social struggle of a certain extent, and a struggle largely in the early days fought at the social level by members of the company, the nobody kids from out of town that came in to dress up in these funny costumes and let their hair grow long and do this stuff over there that they wouldn't dream of going to see. Black girl that was in our company in 1950, all the special arrangements that had to be made for Pat, how so some of us formed a kind of an echelon of protection around her, a bodyguard force which walked her to and from her cloistered dorm on the Sauk campus, and how we were beaten up and thrown out of the Bohemian Club and were refused service at many other places in town. That Pat couldn't have a life. She was only black in sight without us, without our group making her life decent. That's what worked then. It is a kind of a battle. I wish I could remember the guy whose name who owned the B&G sandwich shop. There's a little artsy restaurant there now, but it was a sandwich shop in the old days, and we were there trying to have charbroiled hamburgers after the show one night, and we had Pat with us, and a flouncy little girl, high schoolish type that was waiting tables there came out and says, "I'm not serving you as long as she's here. We don't serve niggers here." And the owner, I can still see his face, but I don't remember his name. He happened to be standing in the doorway, and he heard that, and he walked over to her and took her a little order pad out of her hands and says, "We don't allow bigots like you to work for us either. You are fired as of this instant." And then he took our order. So there's always been a little of everything. It's just that I wanted to register in my notes that there's been some tough times with the townspeople, and having worked PR-wise with the theater, most of my time with the theater, I think I was acutely aware of that. And all the more reason that we appreciated audiences, making them welcome, making them feel they had not come to the ends of the earth after all, but to a wonderful backwater place where high art was in the foment. Well, anyway, Ashland is a different city now, much more aware, much more sophisticated, much more involved economically with the festival, and it is now a destination place. Well, I suppose one of the reasons I feel I should passionately get in that bigotry problem is that when you've had your nose bloodied and you've been screamed at and called everything in the book and shoved around, you tend to feel more passionate about things like that than just treating them as a kind of a theoretical thing you've read about and heard about. And there's nothing wrong with hating something from a distance either when it's wrong, but there's a certain bite to things when it's your nose that's been busted by a bigot's fist. And that was certainly true in my case, and that's why I feel that way. You have to remember that Ashland was settled by people from the South who were everything that the South was noted for in the pre-Civil War and Civil War days, and they brought that with them. The Ku Klux Klan marched in the 4th of July parades in Ashland well into the 20th century. And zealot promoters of that war as long as they could remain at least 3,000 miles away from any of the fighting. And that's the kind of zealotry of pro-war that you get frequently in this country, which has a habit of sending its kids and its unwanted off to do the fighting while everybody else stays home and gets rich. And Ashland was filled with that kind of war fervor, was safely away from any form of hurt, or even from KP. But it got over it, thank God, and the festival flourished, and here we all are in 1992.